Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Well, I can't begin to tell you how gratifying it is to see such a wonderful turnout of alums for our program on free speech today. Thank you for coming out and thank you for coming in. It's a beautiful day out there. We've got very important topics to discuss here, so thank you for coming. I'm Robert George. I have the honor to be the director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions here at Princeton. And I'm louder. I'm supposed to be mic'd with a lavalier. Sound staff, can you get my volume up? Is it up? How about now? Can you hear me? No? Let me try it again. I'm Robert George. I'm the director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions and McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence. I'm the dragon who teaches constitutional interpretation these days. It is my very great pleasure to welcome you to our reunion event on freedom of speech. That's a critical issue facing us today here at Princeton and at university campuses around the country and in the country. Freedom of thought, freedom of inquiry, freedom of discussion and expression. These are essential components of what enables a university, be it Princeton or any other, to sustain its mission as a truth-seeking institution. But these freedoms are, you don't need me to tell you, I'm going to tell you anyway, under attack on college and university campuses today and from people at various places on the political or ideological spectrum. As you may know, the James Madison Program recently launched a new initiative on free speech designed precisely to protect freedom of thought, freedom of inquiry, and freedom of discussion on our campus. That initiative is co-directed by two of my most distinguished scholars, our colleagues, Bernard Haeckel, the esteemed scholar of Near Eastern Studies, and Keith Whittington, the William Nelson Cromwell Professor of Politics, the guy who literally wrote the book on free speech on campus, Speak Freely, Why Universities Must Protect Free Speech, published by University Press. Now, I hope you will be interested in our initiative and in our program. You can find out more information at jmp.princeton.edu, and I would strongly encourage you to go there. JMP, James Madison Program, .princeton.edu. I'm delighted that joining me today to talk about free speech here at Princeton and beyond are three very distinguished Princeton alumni and one of our most outstanding current undergraduate students. Rebecca Adams, class of 2021, joins us from Carnegie Mellon University, where she's a PhD student in mechanical engineering. When Rebecca was an undergraduate, she was our student leader. She was the president of the Princeton Open Campus Coalition, an undergraduate organization dedicated to fostering and protecting a campus environment free of fear, free of intolerance, promoting free speech and academic freedom. Miles McKnight, current student, class of 2023, is an undergraduate fellow of the James Madison Program, and he is currently president of the Princeton Open Campus Coalition. He has just completed a junior paper, I'm pleased to say under my supervision, on academic freedom and on the mission of institutions of learning. We're also joined by Solvig Gold, class of 2017. Solvig is a Pine Prize recipient. She is currently a senior research assistant here at the Madison Program and is completing her PhD in classics at Cambridge University. Finally, we are joined by the legendary law journalist Stuart Taylor, class of 1784. Stuart is the president of a wonderful organization that you need to know about, and that is Winstonians for Free Speech, founded by Stuart Taylor and his co-conspirator Ed Yingling. This is an alumni organization dedicated to protecting and promoting free speech and academic freedom at Princeton, and it is allied with similar associations connected with other colleges and universities around the country. And I'm going to ask Stuart specifically to include some discussion of that in what he says today. Stuart has reported on legal affairs and politics for the New York Times, the National Journal, Newsweek, and other national publications. I'm going to invite each of our panelists to make brief opening remarks. Then we'll chat a bit amongst ourselves up here before opening the floor for questions. Now, I should mention right up front that there is an 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that is the case of Professor Joshua Katz, written about today in the New York Times and in the Wall Street Journal. I, alas, will not be able to say anything of substance about that case. I am representing Professor Katz as his official advocate or advisor in the university's disciplinary system. Solvig Gold is under some constraints here because she is the wife of Joshua Katz. Miles McKnight, Rebecca Adam, and Stuart Taylor are free to say whatever they want. Welcome to all of you for joining, and with that, let me invite our first speaker to say a few words. Rebecca Adam. Rebecca.
So thank you for the opening remarks, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm really bad at public speaking because my field is not obviously in humanities, but obviously in STEM. So I apologize if anything I say is just broken English, but I hope I could give insight. So a lot of you know that a lot has transpired since the year 2020. I don't think I had to elaborate on that. But a lot has happened here at Princeton and beyond. And amidst all that is happening, I think a reasonable concern is that there's a lot of concern about the state of freedom of expression and free speech on campuses in particular. So I remember as a student, I came across a very jarring statistic, or rather note, that on FIRE, which is one of the free speech organizations, that Princeton has a free speech rating of red. And I was also shown statistics from College Pulse survey. So 37% of students say that it's never acceptable to shut down a speaker. So you can imagine what the other percentage is. Racial inequality is most frequently identified as difficult to have an open and honest conversation about on campus. And comfort expressing ideas was given a score of 14.1 out of 25 points. And 250 undergraduates were sampled from about 5,000 students. But we don't really need statistics to really confirm what is happening. We could just use basic observation. I could personally use my observation on my time at Princeton. It was a matter of finding a group of people that was very supportive of different ideas that allowed me to be confident in expressing myself, and what I guess led me to the Princeton Open Campus Coalition, apart from other things. And I think just reiterating what I said before is quite disappointing for an institution that really prides itself as a liberal arts institution that is supposed to develop new national and global leaders to have these sort of issues. So I guess that's what we're really discussing today. And it's becoming even difficult for those with even moderate viewpoints or even nuanced viewpoints to have certain opinions, not even, like, let's say, for me, conservative students. So I guess with what was happening in 2020 and like with the POCC letter, that's what led me to join it eventually because of the mission. And I guess part of the concern was having a group that was politically and ideologically diverse, because free speech seemed to be a more conservative issue, and in part it seemed slightly reactionary. But discussion amongst my members has led to really developing a program where we could invite speakers from both sides of the political aisle or ideological spectrum, or just inviting speakers that never really have a chance to have a platform. So one of the notable events we had was with Glenn Lowry and Randall Kennedy. So I just hope that sort of thing continues, and when I was discussing with Miles, it seemed like it did, which I'm very glad about, because I guess practically free speech is something that has allowed for a very important change, and that's not something that's very emphasized. A lot of the times it seems like people think it's a very stifling thing, but it's caused very important causes in several movements, abolitionist, suffrage rights, counterculture movement, etc. So I guess where we're at now, I just hope we could just talk about certain practical ways of using freedom of speech, as this is beyond some sort of academic issue, to understand that, well, students can't be right all the time. They're not all right all the time. And they are encouraged to engage in discussion. And faculty also has a responsibility of making sure not to alienate students because of their certain viewpoints. So I hope amongst that we could discuss different solutions. I'm also excited to hear what other people on the panel have to say. Thank you.
Let me, before turning to Miles, I just want to assure those of you who, like me, are of a certain age, that you heard what Rebecca said correctly. You heard that she said, today when free speech is regarded as a conservative, even a reactionary issue. Now, if you are 35 years old or older, you would be struck, because do you remember when free speech was a liberal issue? Do you remember when the threats to free speech came from Joseph McCarthy and people like that? What a remarkable turnaround we're experiencing today. Over to you, Miles.
Well, thank you for your introduction. I'm glad you mentioned my JP, which I was really terrified actually to submit to you, but it turned out okay. So my job, I've been told, is to give you a window into the experience of current students and how students go about expressing dissenting points of view, what struggles they face. And in view of that task, I want to do two things. The first is to call attention to an aspect of the free speech struggle that I think is neglected by activists, theorists, faculty, many students. And then second, to clarify some misperceptions about the way the university, not by explicit censorship, but by signaling an implicit messaging, tends to suggest parameters around the scope of acceptable discourse and to foster a culture in which students feel that they can't speak out. And then finally, to end on a note by expressing why I think there are some reasons for optimism. So in other words, I'll start with the bad news, and if you bear with me, I promise I will get to the good. So a big misperception that a lot of people have about the reason why students are not speaking out, and the statistics are clear, students do censor themselves, is that they think that students are concerned about professional and academic consequences. And they are, that's true. But I think that that's actually a secondary reason why students are afraid to speak out. I think the primary reason is actually fear of social reproach and social consequences. Students arrive on campus as freshmen. They don't know how they're going to fit into this community yet. They're just getting their feet wet. They're not socially settled. They realize that there's a lot of high stakes socially at Princeton with eating clubs and so forth. And so they are very cautious about being confrontational or expressing points of view that some will construe as offensive, that dissent from the orthodoxy which reigns on campus. And for what it's worth, they do have examples that they see of students who have dared to speak out, who do face kind of radical social reproach. So for example, I have a friend who was on a club sports team who, after the murder of George Floyd, during the summer of 2020, voiced her views in favor of police against the radical sort of elements of the abolish the police movement. She was stripped of her position on the team, removed from her position as a leader on the team. Students have faced bullying, negative derisive remarks on Twitter, exclusion from groups, consequences in bicker and eating clubs where students are hosed on the basis of the views they've espoused in precepts or wherever. And so as a freshman, someone who students who aren't yet thinking about their career, don't yet know what they would like to major in, when they get to campus and they see these sorts of things and they exist in this sort of culture, you can see why the more tangible, most immediate worry is, what are the consequences for my social life, my health, my mental health, my happiness for speaking out. Now, a lot of the focus, another misperception, or I think a misplaced emphasis from free speech advocates at Princeton anyway, is on fighting explicit university censorship. And we're lucky to have the Chicago free speech principles worked into our governing document here, which afford really robust protections for the right of people to speak freely. I actually think, though, that the main way in which the university hinders the culture of academic freedom, or the state of academic freedom, is by its implicit signaling, by institutional biases, and by double standards, which from students' very arrival on campus during the freshman orientation foster a culture that exacerbates that sort of student culture. So it's not the students who are just to blame here. I mean, I do think the university has some responsibility to work out its institutional biases. So just to give you one example of this, freshman orientation, students are made to attend mandatory panel after panel after panel where only one side of view, one point of view on issues of racial justice or sexual ethics or whatever, economic justice are presented. Professors like Professor Katz are maligned by university officials who doctor quotes in order to portray them as racist and to portray anyone who espouses a particular point of view or dissents from a particular point of view as unworthy of engagement. And in the university's programming and initiatives, they generally bring in speakers from just one side of the spectrum. And this, from the very arrival of students on campus, sets a tone, and it sends an implicit message to students that here you are at Princeton University, this elite, grand institution from which many prominent people have graduated, and this is our community vision, these are our community values. And so students think, well, it goes along with being an enlightened, progressive being, a member of elite high society, that I should espouse the vision and the views of my university. And the university certainly puts itself behind a particular vision in all of its programming. So just to give you one example of that, the Gender and Sexuality Resource Center, which is a center that serves, it's supposed to be the women's center, really. It serves the entire constituency of women. Sponsors Princeton Students for Reproductive Justice, a pro-abortion group, and neglects any support for Princeton pro-life, the opposing point of view, which people of reasonable people of goodwill can hold, and they're totally left out of the picture. Why are there reasons for optimism? So the POCC has spent a lot of time working on rectifying these issues this past year. We fought for institutional neutrality, rooting out institutional biases. We fought for reforms in the freshman orientation program, and we've got the university successfully. We have to commit to incorporating a free speech training session into the freshman orientation for next year, something that was totally absent. And students in this program will be informed of their rights, protected under Section 1.1.3 of Rights, Rules, and Responsibility, which incorporates the Chicago free speech principles into our governing document, and which are legally binding upon the university. So students will now be aware from their very arrival on campus that this is a place where dissent is cherished and where your opposing point of view will be engaged and you will not face reproach, and there are means by which to rectify situations where you do. Another reason to be optimistic is that the POCC and the free speech cause is growing. So the June 2020 letter had 23 signatories. Our most recent letter had over 65, I think. And we have 90, 100 people on our listserv. Our last event, most student events on campus, I don't know if you know, maybe attract 20, 30 people. Our last event brought 200. So, and we brought really notable speakers to campus. And then the last reason I want to say that I think there is some cause for optimism is that with every radical change in society or societal shift, cultural shift, there almost always is some sort of backswing. So if you think about the sexual revolution of the 1960s and the hippie movement of the 1970s, which was followed by the conservatism of the 1980s, you very often, when one side goes so far to one extreme, you have a backlash. And it seems to me, or a backswing. Pendulum effect. And it seems to me that there's real energy behind the free speech cause. I mean, point of evidence number one is the number of people in this room. So I think that getting alumni involved in Princetonians for Free Speech, supporting the POCC and all of this, it really will do some good, a lot of good. And so for those reasons, I am quite optimistic for where we're headed. Thank you.
Solveig, Debbie is reminding us to speak right into the mic, so just push that mic right up to the front of the
Solveig's loud enough.
I got you. This is my 5th reunion, and it's difficult to overstate how much the campus climate has changed in 5 short years. When I was a student, I faced almost no hostility for my outspoken conservative views. On the contrary, I felt celebrated and appreciated by my peers, by my professors, and by the administration. When I hear what it's been like for Miles and his fellow brave heterodox students, I almost can't believe it. Almost. As you just heard, I am married to the very canceled Professor Joshua Katz. I won't get into the details of his case right now, as there are lots of lawyers involved, but suffice it to say, Princeton's treatment of my husband, a good man and, until recently, a much beloved professor, has been so unbelievable that nowadays I'll believe just about anything. So what was Princeton like 5 years ago? Well, actually, I've been asked to take you back to the fall of 2015, when the then students of the Black Justice League occupied President Eisgruber's office in Nassau Hall with a list of demands. Such lists are commonplace nowadays. Now even faculty members, hundreds of them, write them. But back then, this was a new phenomenon, and the overwhelming feeling on campus was that it was a bad thing. Let me stress, I was not in some conservative bubble within the orange bubble. I was in Triangle, 3 singing groups, and Tower, and my friends were all to the left of me. However, in conversation after conversation, I discovered that on these points we agreed. Princeton should not change its distribution requirements, create safe spaces or affinity housing, or, most famously, purge the campus of Woodrow Wilson's name. And we agreed that the Black Justice League's methods were wrong and threatened to stifle dissent. After all, who would be willing to speak against their demands when the members of the BJL would turn around and call you a racist, or, as they had called an outspoken black student, a white sympathizer, not really black? And so 10 of us, black, white, Hispanic, gay, straight, blind, seeing, citizen, non-citizen, conservative, liberal, libertarian, met off campus to establish the Princeton Open Campus Coalition and write an open letter to Eisgruber, explaining that even if the BJL's voices were the loudest, they did not speak for the entire student body. Sure, we received some flack, but for the most part, our peers and professors were grateful. They would pull me aside after class or in the dining room and whisper, "Thank you for speaking up." But in the summer of 2020, when Eisgruber suddenly did an about-face and announced that Wilson's name would be coming down, those same friends applauded the decision. Finally, one of them posted to her Instagram, as if she had always been in favor, when she emphatically had not. Others took to social media specifically to praise the Black Justice League and support the notion that a monument be built in their honor. Maybe those friends really did have a change of heart. Maybe Eisgruber did as well. But they were also under tremendous social pressure to say and do the right thing, a pressure to which we have all by now grown accustomed. I'd rank that among the most disturbing developments in the last 5 years, the ubiquity of compelled speech. When I was a student, people were sometimes scared to speak their minds, but they were not scared into saying things that they did not believe. They simply stayed quiet. But now, silence is violence, and we're handed a template of what to say, the same template produced by every overpaid DEI bureaucrat in the country. No need to think, we are told. In fact, it's better if you don't think. Just speak. Did I say every overpaid DEI bureaucrat in the country? Sorry, make that the Anglosphere. For the last 5 years, I've been a graduate student at the University of Cambridge, and while Cambridge remains blissfully behind American universities on many of these issues, I've watched as students and professors clumsily try to parrot the language of their American peers. In fact, frequently they do so under duress from American graduate students, many of whom begin complaining within weeks, if not days, of matriculation. That's right, we Americans show up in the UK with our loud voices and bad manners, demanding that nearly 1,000-year-old foreign institutions conform to our will, or else. Or else what? No, really, what? Take it from me, cancellation sucks. It is unimaginably painful to have your good name dragged through the mud. But you will get through it. You'll lose some fickle friends, and you'll gain far better ones. Also, you'll gain respect, most especially self-respect. In resistance to the climate of fear, there are new institutions popping up. I've been involved with some of them, the University of Austin, for one. But we're all here this weekend because we care about old institutions, or at least we care about this one. If the panelists' words today ring true to you, then here's what you need to do. Don't pull us aside and whisper thank you, but speak up yourself.
Your Eminence.
I'd first like to thank Robbie for his kind words about Princetonians for free speech and my eminence. And I'd like to confess that I'm not one of the optimists on these issues, but I get a lot of cheer from Robbie every time I talk. He makes it sound so inevitable that our side's going to win. And when I hear allies such as Miles and Rebecca and Solveig, I feel proud of the company I'm keeping.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that means a lot. Even if we lose, we're going to go down proud of what we're doing. Now, I had a detailed and quite eloquent speech prepared about the meltdown of Yale Law School, which you might have read. But you don't have to take my word for that or any details. Just take it from Akhil Amar, who's maybe the most eminent constitutional scholar Yale Law School has produced in generations. He called the Yale administration's conduct dishonest, duplicitous, and downright deplorable. And he went to the belly of the beast to say that, the Federalist Society's annual convention, or at least the belly of a beast. And there's a lot to say about that and a lot to say about the nation's pattern, but today I plan to sketch two related stories about the university's treatment of Professor Katz, of which you've heard a lot. The first story, today featured in all these news outlets, including the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, is President Eisgruber's call for the Board of Trustees to fire Professor Katz over events related to the university's investigation of him for an affair with a student many years ago. Professor Katz was suspended without pay for a year in 2018 for having the affair. The reason for the planned firing of Professor Katz now, which the Board of Trustees is expected to approve, is not yet entirely clear and is disputed by Professor Katz. Because I don't know enough to have positions on those issues, I won't have much to say about that. I do have some things to say about the university's attacks on and smearing of Professor Katz as a racist based on his July 8th, 2020 article in Quillette, sharply dissenting from race-related demands by hundreds of other faculty members. And one reason it's based on that is that nothing else that anyone could possibly find in Professor Katz's record besides that article could even laughingly be supposed to be racist. Nothing racist in his record, nothing in that article either. But that article is the cause célèbre. The attacks on Katz included what appears to have been a deliberate falsification of language in his article by an as yet unidentified subordinate or subordinates of President Eisgruber. I'm not suggesting President Eisgruber was in on it, But I am suggesting that the people who did it were apparently his subordinates, because I'm not sure who else they could have been when they got it on the website, kept it on the website for many months, and so forth. The official or officials deleted, without ellipsis, the phrase, and pay attention to the words here, including the many black students, from the following Katz sentence. The Black Justice League, which was active on campus from 2014 to 2016, was a small local terrorist organization, not the best word choice, some of us thought, that made life miserable for many, including the many black students, that's the part they deleted, who did not agree with its members' demands. It's impossible to think of a non-infamous reason for anyone to do that. I won't have much to say about, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Yeah, some background. The Princeton faculty adopted in 2015 the best rule in the country for protecting campus free speech. It's a university-wide Regulation 1.1.3, modeled on an identical rule first adopted by the University of Chicago. But that protection is now largely illusory, apart from the fact that there's not much chance that a majority of the current faculty would now support it. The protection is illusory because the Eisgruber administration, and as of March 31, President Eisgruber personally, have now gutted the free speech rule by adopting a so-called interpretation that is grossly illogical and outrageously anti-free speech. Eisgruber has claimed absurdly that the free speech rule protects his subordinates' misuse of the university's website and other resources viciously to harass, abuse, and smear as racist in the name of the university. Any Princeton student or faculty member who dares speak out against campus orthodoxy on race. In the current case, the faculty member is Joshua Katz. In the next case, it could be just about anybody. The sin for which Eisgruber and many others have denounced Katz on the university's website in the 2021 freshman orientation and in other contexts was what prompted Eisgruber personally to speak out on the meaning of the free speech rule, March 31, 2022, was a letter from the respected Academic Freedom Alliance, AFA, signed by Princeton professor and free speech expert Keith Whittington, of whom you've heard today, that publicly criticized Princeton's smearing of Katz as violating the free speech rule. Eisgruber responded by sending Keith Whittington an embarrassingly obtuse public retort. He spurned the AFA's request that the attacks on Katz be deleted from the university's website and suggested that the AFA was requesting censorship. That was the word, censorship. Censorship, that was the word. In doing so, Eisgruber claimed, in essence, that Princeton's free speech rule allows the Princeton president and his subordinates to use the university's official website and other resources to attack and smear any professor or student they want for speech protected by the rule. And a number of eminent Princeton professors have publicly said so in a complaint filed over the treatment of Katz. This Eisgruber doctrine, as it should be called, has had a chilling effect on other professors and on students who now have reason to fear that questioning campus orthodoxy about race could get them attacked by the university. The AFA was not alone, not by a long shot, in deploring the university's smearing of Katz. Consider also the blistering indictments by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, ACTA, in a March 9 letter to the Princeton Board of Trustees, and by the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. I can think of no precedent for the AFA, ACTA, and FIRE, which I would think of as the three most respected campus free speech groups in the country, all at the same time, roughly, to be severely criticizing any university for attacking free speech. But they all agreed that Princeton had earned that criticism. It's also especially stunning given past Eisgruber claims that he supports free speech. Eisgruber has also ignored the carefully reasoned criticisms by ACTA and FIRE, as well as by Princetonians for Free Speech, of which I am president. In the face of all these criticisms, the 40-member Princeton Board of Trustees underscored its own contempt for free speech on April 18 by announcing that it had extended Eisgruber's tenure for at least 5 more years. The trustees even praised what they called Eisgruber's outspoken defense of free speech. I guess they don't pay attention to what free speech experts like Keith Whittington think. The next day, as if to add an exclamation point to the Eisgruber administration's shame, yet another indictment of its attacks on cats came in an April 19 report by the Princeton University Committee on Conference and Faculty Appeal. The committee's 9 members issued a strongly worded, unanimous rebuke to a high-ranking Eisgruber subordinate's earlier summary rejection of the formal complaint I mentioned by 8 other professors seeking an investigation into the smears of cats. Small wonder that a broad 2021 survey by FIRE ranked Princeton last among the Ivies and very low on the national scale in terms of protections for free speech. I could go on about Princeton's other insults to free speech, including the university's assertions during the 2021 freshman orientation, which ignored Princeton's free speech rule, that free speech is a tool for racists. And I could go on about the attacks on free speech at other campuses around the country. But I think it's time for me to stop and that we all hear your questions. Thanks.
I'd like to make a couple of points of my own. The first is that I do not believe that this university or any university will be able to establish and maintain a robust culture of free speech, which is every bit as necessary as the formal protections of free speech that you have in bills of rights or in the University of Chicago principles, unless we have genuine viewpoint diversity. Nothing is as suffocating to a culture of free speech as conformism, unanimity of view, the lack of people hearing challenges to what they think. John Stuart Mill, in the classic essay on liberty, many of you, I'm sure, raise your hands. Who has read Mill's, probably when you were at Princeton, right? You can't go back to it often enough. If you're interested in civil liberties, you can't go back to it often enough. And I say this as a critic of Mill's on many points. If you know my own scholarship, I've been critical of Mill's utilitarianism, of his sweeping libertarianism. But when it comes to free speech and the basis of free speech, the reason we need free speech, he gets it right on the mark. Why do we need it? Guess what? We're fallible. Right? Anybody in the room infallible? Pope's not here, is he? So nobody in the room. So you're all fallible. And I'll bet you all would agree, as I would, as the panelists would, that right now, you and I, every single one of us, and everybody else out there holds in his or her head some beliefs that aren't true. Well, raise your hand if you're sure that all the beliefs you have in your head right now are true. No, some are false, right? So if I ask you, why are you going around with false beliefs in your head? You would say, well, yeah, but I don't know which ones are the false ones and which ones are the true ones. If I knew which were which, I'd swap out the false ones and put in the true ones. But then that raises the question, urgent for scholars, for students, for universities, how do we create the conditions that enable people to identify the false ones so they can swap in the true ones? And there is no way to do that unless one allows oneself to be challenged, unless one hears challenges. Nobody's going to swap out their false beliefs for true beliefs if all they hear is confirmation of what they already believe, right? If all you hear is, you're right, you're right, you're right, you're not going to get anywhere. So here at a university where we're students and scholars and where our whole mission is getting at the truth, trying to reduce the number of falsehoods in our heads and increase the number of true beliefs in our heads. It's really important that we challenge each other and allow ourselves to be challenged and create an atmosphere in which people are comfortable challenging and being challenged. You don't have that where everybody agrees on the big questions, or where those who dissent are too frightened, cowering in the corner, whispering, as Solvig says. Sometimes I'll publish something controversial but true, and I'll get a note. I'll get a note from a colleague saying, "That was so wonderful, fantastic, brilliant. Thank you for saying that. Don't tell anybody I wrote you this note." As Solvig says, you got to be speaking, not whispering, right? You can't just, don't whisper to me and to Solvig. Go out there and speak the truth yourself. There is no better way to defend the right to free speech than by exercising it. You've got it. It's no good. Justice Scalia used to carry around a copy in his pocket of the Soviet Constitution. And there was such a thing. And he'd pull it out and he'd read from the Soviet Constitution. The people shall have the right to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom to... Sounded great. Absolutely not worth the paper it was printed on. You know, if you don't exercise those rights, they don't really exist. Just having them on paper as parchment guarantees is no good. So, we do need the written protections of the University of Chicago principles, but we also need a culture of free speech. And to do that, we need viewpoint diversity. We're doing our best in the Madison program to make sure that there is a robust set of challenges going on to the dominant orthodoxies on. We may be right about some stuff, we may be wrong about stuff, we argue about amongst ourselves, we have no dogma, we have no orthodoxy, but it matters less whether we're right or wrong about this or that than that we are challenging each other. Now, some of you will be familiar with one of the most famous members of our faculty, Professor Peter Singer in the Center for Human Values, perhaps the most famous philosopher in the world. Very well known for his defense of the dignity of animals, his opposition to factory farming, and his defense of vegetarianism and so forth. But among the beliefs he holds, among his many controversial beliefs, is the belief that newborn babies are not yet persons. So he believes not only in the legitimacy of abortion, but in the legitimacy of infanticide. Now, if you know anything about me, but every few years, when disability rights protesters come to Princeton and chain themselves, some in their wheelchairs, to the gates in front of Nassau Hall and protest and demand that Professor Singer be fired because of his views about the moral status of the cognitively disabled, severely cognitively disabled, his defenses of infanticide and so forth, I'm in the forefront of defending his right to speak his mind and to challenge me. And I do that not because I think there's some abstract right of anybody to say what they want, but rather, or perhaps in addition to that, because it is so critical for people like him to be able to challenge people like me. Our exchanges, sometimes in person, more often in writing, have profoundly deepened my understanding of the issues we debate, even though he hasn't persuaded me and I haven't persuaded him. I hope that he would say the same thing, that by having to meet my challenges, his understanding has deepened, even if he hasn't changed his mind. What I'm saying is that learning happens, in this case between two scholars who deeply, profoundly disagree, but who want to be challenged. Now, we need to confer that gift on our students. They've got to be challenged. They have to be challenging each other. Otherwise, the learning process just stops. You're just reinforcing whatever you believe. And the dominant orthodoxy, it may be left-wing today, it might be right-wing tomorrow, it might be populist, it might be nationalist, it might be communist, whatever it happens to be, will simply be reinforced and no thinking will go on. End of sermon. Okay. So now we're going to open the floor for questions for our panelists. Yes, Clay McEldowney, my banjo-picking pal.
Thanks, Robbie. I think it's amazing, it's kind of disturbing that we even have to have this forum about free speech. When I was in school during the 60s, there was never a controversy about free speech. There was no no need to have a gathering like this, because everyone was pretty much on the same wavelength, even though we may have disagreed about things. And as an example, when I was a freshman, George Wallace, we all know who George Wallace was, but he came and spoke, and I went to see him and listened to him. And I was compelled when I heard what he had to say. And it affected my thinking about civil rights significantly as a result. Today, George Wallace, I don't think would be permitted even to come to campus and expose people to his point of view so that they might think differently about somebody. So anyway, what you're doing here is wonderful, and I am a happy supporter of everything you do.
Thanks so much, Clay. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of campuses today where Bill Mayer couldn't be invited to speak. Yeah.
So I think the case of Professor Cass and Professor Zig are easy ones. I was just wondering when you all think about Professor Wax at Penn. And the reason I asked that question, I look around, this is not a particularly diverse audience. How do we make this movement more inclusive? So there are people who don't necessarily look like all of us, or many of us here, who are older, socioeconomically privileged, white in many cases. I'm thinking about how we make this movement more powerful.
Rebecca, I think that one's for you.
Yeah, I knew that was coming.
But I'll preface while Rebecca gathers her thoughts on that I think my own experience, I've been teaching for 36 years at Princeton. I've been dealing with this issue now for some time. It wasn't so big at the beginning, but it's been now for the past 5 years, as Solveig said, it's been a big issue. It is very, very tough for minority students who do not hold the views they are supposed to hold to speak out. They are vilified worse than anybody else. This is why Professor Katz had that point in the parentheses that got doctored out of the quote by the people who put together the freshman orientation. He was referring specifically to the, I will use the word, persecution of black students by people in the Black Justice League because those black students wouldn't go along. They were dissenting. I'm going to go ahead and tell you about this. I marched a young woman, a young black woman who was a dissenter from the Black Justice League program and a critic who came under ferocious attack. I marched her over to Rochelle Calhoun's office. Rochelle Calhoun was then and is now the vice president for campus life. And Rochelle behaved very admirably in the incident I'm about to recount to explain to Rochelle how she was being treated, the smears that she was enduring, the threats, we will make sure you never get a job anywhere, the intimidation, being referred to by them as Aunt Jemima. She laid the whole case out in front of Vice President Calhoun, and to her very great credit, Vice President Calhoun made it stop. But it's a special burden on our minority students who do dissent to speak up. It's hard for all students, but especially for those in the minority. Yeah, Rebecca.
I guess I'll start by saying this, because when you mentioned Amy Wax, it reminded me of a discussion I had with a graduate student who, was opposite race of me, and we talked about race and IQ, and I was like, where is this conversation going to go? But we had a very thoughtful and insightful conversation that even though I disagreed with the premise that race justifies or determines, or race and genetics predetermines intelligence, it kind of gave me perspective on the nuances of that other side of that sort of thing. So, I mean, personally for me, if I was given the opportunity to invite her, I would. And it's not because I agree with her, but it's because I'm interested to see what she says. And it would give me the opportunity to at least talk with her and understand that perspective. I think with regards to, I guess having people like me or from other minority backgrounds get involved in this, I guess my current strategy is very slow because it's a matter of really vetting those who could really understand where you're coming from. Because the majority of people you're going to meet, for me, the majority of people you're going to meet, once you say something, For instance, when you say that you're not voting Democrat, for instance, they'll say, well, you're not black, we'll take away your black card, you act white, that sort of thing. Ever since childhood, and I'll never forget it. But, you know, like you have to, I think like with that sort of thing, you kind of have to really start really small. And it's a matter of just seeking out, okay, you like test the waters of different people, and then eventually you get them to like join your cause, that sort of thing. That's the only suggestion that I really have. But when you're having, I guess, events like that, as controversial as that, all we could really do is just to make clear that it's not indicatory of whatever organization that's presenting opinions. It's rather to have this environment so that you could either challenge the speaker very respectfully or at least hear what their perspectives are. And you're not going to agree with it, and that's fine. I think that's just something that has to be made clear, but also just a mentality all of us just has to get over, that you're going to be people that will disagree with you, and there's going to be people like me who are going to disagree with you. I have nothing else to really say, but that's my thoughts.
Just a point on that of my own. I've already outed myself as a free speech fundamentalist, talking about my defenses of my colleague and adversary, political adversary, Peter Singer. But I want to say that I think there is an important role to be played for judgments of quality when it comes to who you invite in. Amy Wax, yes. She is a person of scholarly attainment, MD, PhD, distinguished publication record. She is someone from whom one learns. Now, am I going to bring in Richard Spencer? David Duke? No. They're idiots. You know, I want to hear somebody who's got something. Peter Singer can challenge me. He's a tough hombre intellectually. You know, he's thought this stuff through. If I'm wrong, it's for reasons he's caught on to that I haven't yet. So I think judgments of quality are very important. It's not just, hey, let's just bring in anybody who will blow up the place, cause a huge controversy. We're not here to cause a huge controversy. We're here to learn, to think, to learn how to think. There were hands up over, in the back. Okay, you, sir, yeah.
Thank you. Professor George, class of 77, Matt Jacobs. Stuart Taylor, I'm familiar with you as well. Here's my question. It's not exactly about a campus-related issue, but it's about book bans and free speech. And I would like to take the speech you just gave, Professor George, before your last answer.
My sermon.
Your sermon. And take it to every school board around the country that is considering banning books like Toni Morrison's beloved Pulitzer Prize winner, and say to them, this is anti-free speech. Give people the opportunity to take out books that they would like to read. Don't remove the books from the shelves and make decisions for them. Are we saying that high school seniors don't have the ability to make those decisions when we ban books like that? So is there a tension between, you know, the fact that we're aghast at how Professor Katz has been treated and how some of the same people may be taking the position that book bans are acceptable?
You aren't suggesting, are you, that there might be hypocrisy among people? And that maybe those people are sometimes on the right and sometimes on the left? No, you would. I mean, that'd be like saying you found gambling in Casablanca. Look, as far as I'm concerned, a very good guide here, although we're a private institution, a private university, a very good guide here is the Constitution of the United States, and especially the First Amendment. I don't agree with every aspect of the Supreme Court's interpretation of the First Amendment, including the free speech clause. But there are certain agreed upon principles that I do think are correct. They tend to be the ones that aren't especially controversial. There are certain categories of speech that are unprotected for very good reasons. Threats, intimidation, incitement to violence, obscenity, defamation, false advertising. These are not within the ambit of protection. So if there is a genuinely obscene book, if people are making threats, intimidation, exposing national security secrets, that's one thing. But if you're talking about Toni Morrison's Beloved, or you're talking about Amy Wax's thought or work, then it's a different story. Now, there are legitimate questions about what is appropriate K-12. And I think there's something of a sliding scale. There are some books that have full First Amendment protection, or some writings or images that have full First Amendment protection that don't belong in second grade, that don't belong in kindergarten, that might very well belong in 11th grade or in 12th grade. So my thought on this is, in designing, if you're a school board, if you're a state legislature, if you're responsible for curriculum development, maybe even with a private school, you should be asking, what can we do at each step along the way, from K through 12, to put that student, that boy or girl, that young man or woman, in a position that when they hit Princeton, when they hit University of Texas, Austin, when they hit Kansas Wesleyan, wherever they end up in college, if they go to college, they will then be in a position to adjudicate, to think for themselves about the competing moral and political questions that are raised by the works that they would then have to talk about, have to engage. So that's my perspective on it, but let me ask the other panelists.
If I may, I think it is so important that we protect our libraries. They're basically the final frontier in some of the culture wars. They're the one place left where you can receive information unmediated through professors with their own biases. Yes, you're getting it mediated through the author, but you can pick which book you want to read. And so, yeah, if you're looking to support financially institutions, I would say really, really try to protect those libraries.
Yeah, so if you have somebody who says, I think we should ban Huckleberry Finn, but not Toni Morrison, or if you have somebody who says, I think we should ban Toni Morrison, but not Huckleberry Finn, then you're dealing with hypocrisy, you're dealing with ideology. These are people who want indoctrination, not education. It's a different story when they've got a consistent picture and have reasons for thinking at this age or at this stage we should or shouldn't have these issues being engaged by our young people. Yes, over here.
Nikos Panagos from the allegedly great class of 72. We're all proud here to be alumni of a great university, highly ranked on many different scales, except the one on fire. And could you give us some of the criteria, the objective criteria that FIRE uses to rank universities on free speech? And what would Princeton have to do to rise to at least the top 5?
I'll take a stab at it. I think FIRE is a great organization. I've never entirely understood how they derive their rankings and why Princeton ranks as low as it does. I can think of reasons I would rank it low. I'm not quite sure what their reasons are, but among them, I think, they do a lot of surveys of students. A lot of their rankings depend on what anonymous students say in surveys about free speech at that university. And it wouldn't just be questions like, does your university support free speech? It would be questions like, are you afraid to say what you believe in class? That's a negative mark on the university every time somebody says yes, and so on. But I don't, I think the problems with free speech at Princeton, although FIRE's ratings, I think, are supportive of the things that one might criticize, I'm not sure the best place. In other words, if everything else that I knew about Princeton's free speech seemed fine, except the FIRE ratings, I would discount the FIRE ratings.
Yes, up there. I'll look on this side next, yeah.
Hello, so I'm currently a graduate student, not alumni yet, alumnus yet, hopefully we'll make it to Oakland one day. But I have a question for Stuart and Solvay particularly. So the university is more than just the buildings we have on campus, beautiful as they are. It's more than just the faculty and the students. The university is a community that goes beyond both into the future and the past, the alumni. And I think many people in this room, are hearing these stories of what things were like 5 years ago, what things are like today, and are just surprised, appalled. What can alumni do, and both now and in the future, to make sure that what we see now is not something that 5 years from now looks like those were the good old days. What can alumni do to help Princeton be more like what it used to be, like in a more robust engagement?
Well, I'd say the first thing is don't give up on Princeton. I mean, you can see, here I am, my husband is about to be fired by this institution, and yet here I am wearing my orange and black. And it's almost farcical, but I love this place, and it's because I love this place that I am so pained by what is going on. If I didn't care about it, then whatever. But don't give up on Princeton just yet. It is the rhetoric of the other side to say, burn the place down. Professor Padilla Peralta, in the freshman orientation that was mandated for all freshmen this year, told the students that he wanted them, I'm going to paraphrase here, but he no longer wanted to cultivate the loyal, hip, hip, rah, rah kind of Princetonians. And he said, we want professors to equip our students with the tools to tear this place down and build a new one. So as tempting as it is to give up on Princeton and say, okay, this is it, let's build new institutions, and we should be building new institutions, I don't want to give in to that rhetoric either. And so we've got to keep fighting. Now that's not a very practical response, but that's what comes to mind first.
At a more practical level, what could alumni support that would make it?
Oh, sorry, give all of your money to the James Madison Program.
Very practical.
But save a small fraction of it for Princetonians for free.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
But the rule there is don't give your money to annual giving. Sorry.
There's somebody up there had a hand up. Was it you, sir? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
In fact, that was my specific question. How do I donate directly?
Oh, okay. Well, since you asked, I'll speak for the Madison program, and then Stuart can speak for Princetonians for Free Speech. And Miles, you can say a word about POCC. Yeah, okay. So the Madison program was founded in the year 2000, millennial year, July 4th, 2000. Under the terms on which we were founded, I raise all the money for our program. We now have an annual budget that's approaching $4 million. We do not receive an annual allocation of money from Princeton University, nor have we requested one. I'm perfectly, happy may be too strong a term, but perfectly willing to take responsibility for raising that money. In return for that, the Madison program is not taxed on our contribution. So our donors know that every dime given goes to the cause that they want to support: free speech, the understanding of American constitutional principles, the understanding of the basic Western tradition of thought about moral and political matters. There's no overheads that are charged or anything like that. Gifts to the Madison program are counted as gifts to Princeton University. As a matter of fact, they're made to the trustees of Princeton University for the use of the James Madison program. If you let us know that such a gift is on its way, we'll make sure, ride herd on it to make sure that it goes into the right account. Bank errors, we've learned, are never in your favor. And they do happen. But that's how you can support the Madison program. We do rely on that. Getting close now to $4 million is a lot of money for an old guy like me to have to raise every year. But I'll say happy. I'm happy to do it because it enables us to have something on this campus for our students, and I'd love it if the students and recent students would speak to this, that is unlike anything you will find anywhere else in the Ivy League, or probably anywhere else in elite institutions in the country. But let me turn it over to the students, and Miles, while you're at it, why don't you say a word about donations to POCC?
Sure, so the POCC falls under Otis, the Office of the Dean of Undergraduate Students. Many undergraduate organizations fall under Otis, and so you can be in touch with Otis about having a donation go specifically to the POCC's account. The Madison program, there seems to be a community of conservatives but also liberals who are open-minded that is vibrant and tight and connected and very active on this campus, that even since my freshman fall in 2019 has grown exponentially. It is so much more active. The Princeton Tory is so much more active. The POCC is resuscitated and so much more active. There's so much going on. Princeton Pro-Life, the Anscombe Society, they're all way more active. And I think a large part of that energy is because you have this key player in the institution, which is the Madison Program, which sends this very clear message to students that here you have some professors, Professor George and others, who with a large intellectual footprint, who are sending a message to students and letting them know that, you know, there are institutions or there are communities here where you will be cherished if you think critically, deeply, and for yourself. And so I think that sort of, just like I was saying earlier, how the institution, how the university sometimes tends to foster a culture of silence, the Madison Program is sort of counteracts that by fostering or suggesting a culture of debate and dissent. And I think that is one of the main reasons, and your generosity, for why conservative life is and heterodox life is so much more active now than before.
Stuart?
In terms of donations for Winstonians for free speech, which are always welcome, we have a Contact Us button on our website, princetoniansforfreespeech.com, and you could just send a note to that button saying, how do I make a contribution? We plan to put a contribute button on the website, but Ed Yingling, who's our worries about regulatory complications, says that's not as simple as it might seem, so it's taking a while to get that done. As to discontinuing giving to the university, we haven't advocated as an organization that anyone do that. There are a lot of people who basically agree with us, who have just a sentimental soft spot for Princeton University, and they don't want to stop giving money to it. Some of our most generous contributors are also generous contributors to Princeton University, and we don't want to antagonize people who feel that way. We may get to that point. But the other thing about contributions to the university is Princeton and its peers are so rich, so many billions of dollars, that you could stop giving them money, everybody could stop giving them money for 50 years, and they could still sail on censoring everybody they want to. And so the question that was asked a while back about how do we make our voices heard, so to speak, I think public opinion is going to be critical in this battle, especially if you can't really accomplish that much by cutting off contributions. Although once you get below the big, the top schools, when you get down to less fancy schools, cutting off contributions can make a difference. But we think publicity, letters to the editor, letters to the trustees, letters to Ice Gruber, lots of letters from lots of people making lots of good points is probably the best single thing people can do. It may sound like an uphill battle. Did I say that earlier? But I think that's critical.
Princetonians for Free Speech is not part of Princeton University. It's an independent 501c3
exactly.
entity.
Yes, I should have made that
Princeton
clear.
Open Campus Coalition and the Madison Program are parts of Princeton University. You give your money to Princeton University, designating it for these entities.
Thank you very much. I was only giving $100 to Princeton this year, which is less than I've given in prior years, and because of the Professor Katz issue. That was what swayed me from making further donations. Now that goes to you. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to follow up on the book and banning and all that. I've often thought that with digital technology and the dissemination of digital copies of books, that there could very well be a reason to suspect that the text that I read or others read is not the original text, it's the edited text, whether it's Random House or some other publisher editing it for their own reasons, or whether it's a more nefarious type editing to remove the N-word from Upton or whatever. Is there a place we could go, like a wiki site or some such database that would report the original text, maybe juxtaposed or highlighting the editor influence, if you will? Are you aware of anything like that that would help us defend?
I am not, but I wonder if any of the panelists are. Solvig, are you?
No, it sounds great. You should make it. But
Yeah.
I need another project like anything else.
Yes, ma'am.
I guess I have a two-part. One for Miles at the Princeton Open Campus. have you and your members on campus gotten pushback from others on campus? I'm wondering what the environment here on campus is like for you, standing up about this. And then just generally, when I was at the university in the 90s, it was all about open debate and the search for truth and all of that. And is that, I'm wondering, is that open debate and search for truth culture even still here anymore?
So let me give you one example of one thing that happened to POCC members. In June of 2020, there was, or maybe July of 2020, there was a letter of demands put out, signed by something like 500 people, many faculty members, a series of illiberal and censorious demands after the death of George Floyd and the moral panic that inspired, that provoked. Among the demands were, for example, the creation of a faculty committee to police the research output of the university, to purge it of racist content that didn't meet the definition of anti-racist.
Let that sink in.
With the terms of racism and anti-racism being defined and promulgated and enforced by the committee itself. Demands like this, curricular changes and so forth. So the POCC, I guess 2 predecessors ago, Akil Rajasekar, penned a letter with 23 other members of the Open Campus Coalition, 4 pages or so, sent to President Eisgruber raising objections to the certain illiberal aspects of that letter. Those students faced hell. Pictures of them, the pictures of their face from the university's sort of online database were promulgated on all of the email listservs, put into one box and said, these are the racists among us. One student lost a job offer at a prestigious financial firm in New York City for signing the letter. I mean, life was made miserable for the 23 people who signed that. In fact, now when we do letters, I write them. I tend to write them with my co-author and good friend Abigail Anthony, who's here, an editor, and we put our names on them as authors, but we guarantee to the signatories that when the letter is released to the public, their names will be redacted so that they don't face backlash and reproach. And then other small examples. Our posters are frequently ripped down that we spent hundreds of dollars on for our events. People are bullied on social media. I mean, it can be something.
One issue on which students have been bullied, by the way, is any defense of Israel or opposition to the BDS movement trying to divest from businesses, pushing the idea of divesting from businesses, doing business with Israel.
Let me just say one thing about the second part of your question about whether or not cultures. I would say that the broader institutional culture is no longer that culture that you're referencing. But I think there are smaller subsets of the Princeton culture where that ideal still reigns. The Madison Program is an example. Students who seek out particular courses, I'm thinking of, civil liberties, constitutional interpretation, where that is still the philosophy that reigns. The POCC, certain clubs where the philosophy of open discourse and engaging with dissenting points of view is still operative. But you have to find them. You have to seek them out. And a lot of students, that's one other point I want to make, is that a lot of students are not so passionate about the free speech fight. They're not passionate about maybe philosophy, or they're not passionate about politics. And so they don't get involved, and that's okay. Not everybody needs to be passionate about everything. But what happens when you have a culture, a censorious culture, and an illiberal culture to that type of person is that maybe they feel a particular way about a controversial issue. They think they might think something about it. But because even delving into the issue, getting engaged, and having the possibility of espousing a view that, coming to espouse a view that is a heterodox point of view is worrisome, those students sort of willy-nilly shut off their inquiry and don't get involved in it. And they just go along with the dogma that's promulgated by the loud people, the people we would call the woke mob.
I want to tell a bit of the rest of the story of the student who lost that job. I want to name the name of the firm. It was Deloitte. A Deloitte interviewer, herself an alumna of Princeton, canceled an interview with this student for that job because he had signed the letter, and she had come under pressure from students on the Princeton campus who were targeting this young man. The faculty group here at Princeton that supports Students for Free Speech, the group that founded the Academic Freedom Alliance. A couple of my colleagues are here today, Beth Bogan, John Londrigan. We learned about that case. We got in touch with some of our friends, Bill Walton, who's here, Kathy Crow, some of you know Kathy or happen to be a classmate of Kathy's, a few other people, and within 6 hours, that student had a better job. But at most campuses, most universities, there's no one to do that. The students are isolated and there's no help. The cavalry is not on the way.
And many students here don't know to reach out to people like you and the other faculties. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important that freshmen learn about the Chicago free speech principles, which afford to them, guarantee to them rights, which are legally binding upon the university. So, yeah.
You've had your hand up.
Yeah, so Amos Eno, also with Nikos, class of 72, and in response to the gentleman asked a question, I support both Madison and Winstonians for free speech. I still send a nominal $50 to annual giving. I intend to note, please, for my sake, fire Ice Gruber. One point is missing here, and particularly in the time log that our very fine speakers spoke about. I'm a veteran of the environmental movement for 50 years. I've been experiencing everything that has been talked about here, censorship, character assassination for 50 years. This is where a lot of this stuff started, was in the environmental movement, and it's still the new religion of controlled speech.
I think that's a comment rather than a question. Thank you for it. Let's see, I'm going to kind of bounce around. We're running short on time, but yeah, you're next, sir. I see a lot of hands up. Yeah.
Frank Busella from the grade class of 2014. I'll preface this all by saying I'm a bit of a lefty. I believe in pro-choice. And I've been watching both with horror but also admiration at the movement of the Federalist Society and sort of filling the Supreme Court with seats of power, recognizing where the reins of power are and seizing them and having a generational project to do so and ultimately achieving a goal, which we can debate whether it's a good goal or a bad goal, but being successful in achieving that goal. And I think freedom of speech is great. I think, you know, the Madison Program's work is great, POCC, FIRE, et cetera. But a lot of it feels like shouting into the ether, if not to seize the reins of power, to identify sympathetic-minded people and put them in the dean's offices and president's offices and in the board of trustees. So where is that movement to identify those seats of power and fill it with like-minded individuals?
Did I tackle that?
Yes, Stuart. Yeah.
It's a very good question, and it's a discouraging answer. The elections for the trustees, I don't want to sound Trumpian, have been pretty well rigged, so that nobody who's not part of the kind of the governing coalition ever has much chance of becoming a trustee. And there are 40 trustees, which is one way to make sure that if a couple of disloyal people get in there, that they can't do too much damage. And I think President Eisgruber's hiring patterns in terms of the bureaucracy are relentlessly diversity, equity, inclusion, progressive, equity, inclusion, diversity, progressive. And it's hard to get to the reins of power, and that's why I emphasize trying to get public opinion rallied around our cause and hoping that bad publicity might have an impact on people who don't respond to moral persuasion.
I'm myself a conservative, but I'm delighted that we have so many undergraduate fellows in the Madison program who do not agree with me on political issues, but who do believe in free speech, who want to better understand the principles of American constitutionalism, and we form a community despite our differences. And I'll tell you the thing I don't want. I don't want to swap out progressive control, political control of this or any other university for conservative political control. I don't care whether you're a liberal or conservative. I want people who believe in the truth-seeking mission of the university and who understand that the prosecution of that mission requires freedom in the same way that bodily life requires oxygen. Academic freedom is the oxygen of the intellectual life. So we need people as trustees, as deans, as presidents, who really do believe that we're here to challenge each other and to be challenged, united not by our substantive political or moral ideological views, but by our shared commitment to get at the truth, recognizing our own fallibility. Your hand was up there, ma'am. Yes, thank you.
I'm 2012, and it seems to me that one of the reasons things have gotten so
Louder, please.
Yeah, one of the reasons that things have gotten so much worse is because the incoming freshmen now have basically been raised in an environment where every bit of media they consume, their teachers, their schools are kind of just forcing on them a single narrative. And in terms of raising, the next generation, I'm curious, in order to raise them to be free thinkers, you kind of have to now prepare them to accept social isolation, to accept losing jobs, to accept not being the popular people on campus. And I'm curious, for the reasons what would you say is kind of the thread that kind of gave you the guts to be willing to stand up for that? And Professor George, are there any common threads you see among the students who are really embracing free speech and kind of willing to accept the repercussions?
Okay. First, let's have those who've been in this recently, Miles and Rebecca, respond. Then I'll say a word. Yeah, Rebecca, did you want to start? Yeah, or Miles, go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'm really lucky that I grew up in a part of the country that is not woke. I mean, it's just nowhere. I'm from the mountains, rural mountains in western North Carolina, where things like, woke ideology, gender ideology, whatever, critical race theory, I don't know, were not shoved down my throat, forced down my throat as a kid. Now, I don't know if that's starting to change there. But I will say that, I wasn't very politically engaged. In middle school and high school, I became more so. I come from the district represented by Madison Cawthorn. Was represented. But so I considered myself, so that's sort of the political standard there. So I considered myself maybe to the left of center, because my perception of the center, I think, was skewed. and then I came, because Mark Meadows was my congressman before Madison Cawthorn. So, but then I came to Princeton and I was shocked. And I spent the first year, when I came to Princeton, it was the first time I was asked my pronouns, and I was confused. I spent the first year sort of, like I talked about, other freshmen doing, sort of socially insecure maybe. I don't know what my place is going to be here. I'll just go along. I'm not going to be confrontational. And so stomaching a lot of things and sweeping things, my discomfort with a lot of things under the rug. And then I wrote an article for the Princeton Legal Journal about an affirmative action case, which now is before the Supreme Court, and I was canceled for it, and thus was born my relationship to Professor George and my activism. But so I think that many people are lucky like me to come from an area where there is more debate is cherished. I don't know what the solution is for students who come from, say, Trinity or Dalton, the collegiate, the schools in New York, other than to say that I think the Madison program does a pretty good job of curing it.
Well, I went to one of those schools, Nightingale Bamford, all-girls school. I was the only conservative, or at least the only outspoken conservative in my class growing up. But the reason I was outspoken was she's sitting in this room, my mother. I think the best thing you can do as a parent is model for your children what it looks like to speak up. My mother did that. She has never been very popular, nor has she ever cared about being very popular, for better and for worse, Mommy.
She's very popular. She's very popular.
I learned that from a young age. So again, as I say to all of you, speak up and teach your children to do the same.
Rebecca?
I guess for me, I come from the very blue state of New Jersey, which is here. And I grew up in an also very progressive town. However, I guess, this is related to Soldig's remark. It was really my parents that raised me in, not only Christian traditions and Christian ethics, but also the Jewish tradition of debating. That kind of allowed me to, now start thinking critically, because that's the thing you do as a scientist. You have to do that anyways. But also gave me a more traditional conservative basis. So it was a matter of going through that throughout my time in elementary school and then high school. I think high school is really the time when I became more aware about the political environment, because it was 2016 and you can't avoid it. And so that's when I actually created a free speech organization with one of my friends. And so I guess that created the spark of being interested in that sort of issue, of actually having an environment where students could speak about different issues and learn from each other, because it was something I realized it was deficient in my high school. I guess when I went to Princeton, though, it was a matter of just playing hide and seek with my views. So I guess I played pretend with certain, let's say, identities or certain things in order to get a pass into certain areas, or to make sure I won't be shunned out of certain areas, because I just have I'm very sensitive about my image, but right now I don't care, and I'll tell you later. So I guess later on, when I as I mentioned in my opening statement, around 2020, I just could not take the fact that with, for instance, talks about racism, there was no room for other people who had different opinions to actually thoroughly discuss these issues. And so that was, I guess, the spark that led me to POCC, but also just be very passionate about this movement that's going on. And I'm glad it's actually getting better.
Can I say one? Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, Miles, go ahead.
Just one really brief thing that I think is important is I think it's important for kids who are indoctrinated all throughout their primary education to come to places like Princeton, and for there to be older students who have spoken out, who have been canceled, and who they can see survived it and have a safety net and are still successful and have good social lives and so forth. One way to make that happen, of course, is to have those students constantly supported and reinforced by alumni and faculty. That's crucial.
Yeah, I should loop that back to that point, because I was going to say I wrote some articles for the Tory, and are there some Tory members here who remember that infamous article that I wrote? Okay, because I got pretty badly roasted on social media for that. It was about Black culture and accountability. But anyways, I guess that was the realizing moment that, okay, you really shouldn't care about, you should care. Obviously, there's going to be worries about, okay, finding a job and personal image and things like that. But you can't have that bog you down and speak about issues that you really care about. So I think going back to the point that you said, Miles, I think it would be really interesting if, let's say during freshman orientation or whatever, that programs like the James Madison Program or organizations like POCC are also included on the table. There's heavily recruiting for that.
That's the commitment we've gotten.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if there's heavily recruiting for that, and like you said, the opportunity for incoming students to really talk with students like us who had these experiences and the pushback, and was able to mentally overcome them and physically as well. I think that would be a good start. That would be kind of a grassroots sort of thing.
We have time for one more question. You, sir.
Thank you very much for this panel. I'll be doing a graduate student class in 2017. This is maybe I should start there. So this is a response to the question you raised about minorities that was addressed to Rebecca. Recommendation, some students, religious groups, I think we can focus more on religion, the place of religion, in the way that religion presents, at least some religions present a vision of humanity that is egalitarian. And so to the question about how to bring minorities and people of a different class to think just in a heterodox way, I think as the Anscombe Society does here, but perhaps there can be more creative partnerships with different religious student groups. So that's just it.
That's a very good suggestion. That's a very good. I'll close with this little story since you brought up the question of religion. When I arrived at Princeton way back in the Middle Ages, the fall of 1985, there were some faculty members, a couple who had a real reputation for it, who were known to relish the prospect, rubbing their hands together, relish the prospect of the kid, the student coming in from the cornfields of Indiana, Eagle Scout. Grandpa was a World War II veteran, saluted the flag, patriotic spirit, evangelical Christian, traditional morality, and they couldn't wait because they were going to get them here and they were going to tell them about Darwin and the historical criticism of the Bible and so forth. Challenge them, challenge them. We don't get that student anymore. These poor people who would like that, those faculty members who might like to do that, they don't get the opportunity because the kids come in pre-indoctrinated. You can't, right? So they'll come in from Nightingale, Bamford, Andover, Exeter, these famous public high schools like Chevy Chase, Maryland. And they're just, they'll be fully in line with, totally on board with, can give you chapter and verse as if it's the catechism of the whole woke program, environmentalism, racial issues, sexual issues, and so forth. And they arrive. And this time, I'm the one. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to our panel.